Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the next installment of Client Success webinar, Mastering the Art of Workforce Management. Today, I've got Miranda Patton here, a project coordinator on the Client Success team, who's going to walk us through managing your workforce. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we jump into it. You can chat any questions you have in the lower left-hand corner. We'll address any of those as part of the webinar. And then finally, at the end of the webinar, we are going to serve up a quick 2-question survey. We appreciate any feedback that you have for helping us to improve these webinars going forward. Without further ado, Miranda Patton, welcome.
Thank you for that introduction, Aaron. As he mentioned, I am Miranda, and I will be your host today for our webinar. We're going to be covering a few different topics and also going into our Project Center and Workstation platforms just to show you how to utilize the features we will be discussing today. So first and foremost, why is workforce management so important? Just like with any team, we need to be able to effectively communicate and set expectations to reach our goals. With an online community of contributors, it's a bit trickier since we can't always talk to them face-to-face. Project Center has a lot of different features to help curate an online workforce, and in this webinar, I am going to cover a couple of different topics, including what are proficiencies and why do they matter, how to tell who is completing a particular task, messaging, and feedback best practices, as well as how to know when it's time to remove a contributor from your project. So first, what are proficiencies and why do they matter? Proficiencies show a contributor's performance on a high-level overview for a specific project and helps you understand their work quality as a whole, and we can have different proficiencies for a specific assignment. When you first launch a project, everyone on your workforce starts out as a beginner since they have not submitted tasks for that project yet. But as the project moves on, we'll notice that they had considerable improvement, and then we can consider them for level promotions. As you can see here, we have 4 different proficiency levels to choose from: beginner, intermediate, advanced, and expert. And I will give you a kind of summarization of what expectations each of those proficiency levels have. So as I mentioned before, beginners are new to the project. Most likely they have not submitted any work or maybe only a handful of tasks and are still familiarizing themselves with the project instructions. The biggest benefit to this proficiency level is the ability to set soft blocks. And essentially what this means is you can set a task submission limit. So say you want to limit contributors to 5 submissions at a time. What this does is once they hit that threshold, their submissions have to be reviewed and they need to receive feedback before they can submit the next round of submissions. This just helps curate the training process for those beginner level contributors. Contributors that are ready for a promotion to intermediate have demonstrated that they have a firm understanding of the instructions and can begin to really hone in their skills. Contributors at this level also gain access to more tasks as they are no longer affected by a soft block. Advanced contributors have a full understanding of the project and have had time to build their skills. So once they go in and submit work, we can consistently rely on them to submit high quality. And finally, experts are the best of our best. They are the most trusted contributors on our workforce, and they consistently submit high quality work, and oftentimes we can rely on them to exceed expectations on our project. So with all that in mind, we're going to go into Project Center, our business-facing platform, and show you where to find a contributor's proficiency level, as well as how to promote and demote their levels. So when considering a proficiency level promotion or demotion, we take a few items into account. Of course, it depends on the specific project requirements, but we typically compare a contributor's approved tasks versus their rejected or rewritten tasks. So for example, if a project has a low level of effort and very objective rules, these tasks are easier to complete, so we would set that threshold of promotion typically lower, say about 15 approved tasks before they qualify for the next level. On the other side of that, projects that have a very high level of effort and subjective rules take typically a higher level amount of approved tasks to qualify, so say 20. At the end of the day, we want to incentivize our best contributors to focus their efforts on our projects, as opposed to any other project they might participate on. The ideal goal is to build a workforce of experts, but it takes time to get to that point. Level promotions and demotions only affect the individual jobs of a workflow. So as you can see here on the contributor profile page, we have a proficiency level box on the right-hand side that shows essentially a bar graph summary of all of the proficiency levels they have for your projects. So to promote or demote a level, we are going to want to select a level, and then it's going to pull up the different assignments they have that proficiency in. So we would select that assignment and then select the new level. Now when we go to the next pop-up, it's going to automatically populate promotion or demotion depending on what level was selected. You'll also be prompted to leave a note to the contributor. They are notified when their proficiency levels are changed, so we do encourage you to leave a courtesy note explaining why their level has changed, especially if it's for a demotion. We want to set up our contributors for success and leave feedback so that they can take that into account when they submit future tasks. You'll also be prompted to leave an internal note. This is for internal use only. Contributors cannot see this. The only other people who can see this would be project administrators on your account, and it's just for internal tracking purposes. So say they're having a bit of trouble understanding some of the nuances of the project, we would want to call that out here so other project administrators can reference that. Later on in this presentation, as I mentioned, I will also cover best practices for blogging contributors, but we're saving that for the end so we can take everything we discussed here and put that into practice. So another way to leverage proficiency levels is to enable level-based pay. And to do this, we're going to want to go to a manage workflow page and go into these settings for the assignment. So here we're going to go into a create assignment and scroll down to the settings page. And then you'll see an option to enable level-based pay. The biggest benefit of this is to incentivize our workforce to continuously submit high-quality work and strive for that next level up. So for instance, say we have a project with a very high level of effort and it will run long term, we'd want to incentivize those contributors over a long period of time so they can consistently come back to your project as opposed to other projects. What we can also do with this feature is limit which proficiency level has access to a project in a certain time period. So say we have a small batch of tasks we want to complete very quickly, we can set that proficiency level pay to not eligible, so beginners will not be able to see this project and submit tasks for that amount of time that it is set to not eligible. And then intermediate through expert can submit tasks. The biggest benefit for this is that we can ensure that our top contributors are submitting for this high priority batch. And then when we want to release maybe a larger batch and have everyone submitting work for it, we would set that beginner pay level back to its original value. So while we're on this page, I also want to go over another feature that helps us manage our workforce, and this is known as rework. So most of the time for any project that we manage, we want to enable rework. And what this essentially does is it allows the contributor to edit their work and resubmit it for approval. We realize that we can't always get it perfect the first time around, and this basically helps us facilitate that trial and error process and really train our workforce so we can reach that expert level goal. Typically, we set the rework attempts to 1 or 2, and then time allowed to claim rework to 1 or 2 days, just so that they have enough time to see that they have that task and then submit it again. With all this in mind, we'll now cover how to tell who has completed a particular task so we can monitor their performance and evaluate them for promotion and demotion levels. There are a couple of ways to do this, and the most efficient way is to go to Contributor Report. And then on this page, we're going to select Contributor Performance. And if you have ever run a report before, you're aware that we can set different filter dimensions to pull specific information. So say we want to pull tasks completed in the month of May only, we can set that, and then group information by project, workflow, as well as set filter dimensions, which is just a more narrow view of what information you want to pull. Say you only want information related to a specific contributor, you can set that filter. And once everything is set, you can hit Run Report, and it'll pull all of that information that you would like to see, and then you can see what tasks have been completed by which contributor. So we also have another webinar in the pipeline to go over reports in more depth. So keep an eye out for that. That will also explain how to use reports to make decisions regarding your projects. Now, the other way to find out who is completing a particular task is by going into Workstation and completing review tasks if you have that client review job set up where project administrators or private contributors are reviewing work before it is completed. So we're going to go ahead. This is our freelancer-facing platform. So this is where, when you set up a project, this is where it is housed. And when we click into that, we will see a gray bar right underneath the instructions that will show original contributor and their name. This is the name that you can use to search for their profile on your Project Center account. We'll also see a few other notes of information, such as approval rating and an ability to flag a contributor. Now, I want to note for approval rating, the reason most likely to set it 0% is because this contributor has not submitted work for this project before, but once they do start submitting that, we will see that increase. However, approval rating is a high-level overview of approved tasks versus rejected tasks. So say this was at 80%. What that essentially means is that 80% of their submissions have been approved, and the other 20% have been reworked or rejected. This is just another way for, as a reviewer, to have an understanding of their performance on this project and see, okay, I see they're struggling a little bit, and take some extra time in reviewing the work and make sure we call out what they're struggling with so they can improve. The other feature on this page I want to highlight is the ability to flag a contributor. This will be utilized mostly by our online workforce as well as our private contributors if they are reviewing tasks. So what we would do here is simply click Flag Contributor and provide a reason. Most commonly, we see this happen when a reviewer notices that a particular contributor is struggling and they want to be able to call that out to the client. So once they put in that reason and hit Save, the client will receive a notification, and then they can investigate if the contributor has received several flags or just review that specific task and see if they agree with the reason for the flag. Now, if we scroll down on this page a little bit, we're going to see an ability to leave feedback to the contributor. This is a great way, again, to help train our workforce. We can't always get it right the first time, as we mentioned, so we want to be able to call that out to them and help them improve. So say they're a beginner and there's some brand voice guidelines that they aren't quite grasping, we want to be able to give them a few pointers and say, hey, this is what you've been struggling with. Here are some pointers to help you improve. We always require our OneSpace Direct freelancers to leave feedback when they are rejecting or reworking a task, just simply because we can't always read each other's minds. So we want to make sure the contributor who receives that rework or reject understands the reasoning behind that decision, and then they have the adequate feedback to make improvements. We always want to make sure we set our contributors up for success so we can reach that expert level workforce. Contributors also have the ability to send feedback to a project administrator by using our messaging feature in Workstation. So we're going to go ahead and go back to our Find Work page, and you'll see here the project name, and then directly underneath that, the client name. So we're going to go ahead and click on that, and it's going to pull up the project administrator set for that Project Center account. The contributor will then click Message Project Manager, and then leave a message for them to send to that appropriate contact. Typically, we see contributors use this feature when they have questions about the instructions. So say you launch a project, and in one tab it says, use the Oxford comma, but then in another tab it says, do not use the Oxford comma. It's going to be difficult for the freelancer to say, okay, what do we actually want here? So they're most likely going to send you that question and ask for clarification. And once that message is sent, you'll be able to see that in your Project Center account. So we're going to go ahead and head back over to that, scroll back up to the top of the page, and you'll see an envelope right next to the client name. Go ahead and click on that, and that will take us to our message center. This is where all of our notifications and direct messages are housed. So once that contributor sends you that question, this is where you can see it and answer that. And we do encourage you to be active in answering freelancer questions, simply because when a freelancer sees that the client is engaged, they're more inclined to focus on your projects because they understand that if they have a question, you'll be available to help them. We also need to ensure that contributors know we want them to be successful. And this is just another way to help facilitate that process. And now that we have all of that base knowledge on how to manage our workforce, it's time to discuss how to know when to determine to remove a contributor from a project. So we're going to go ahead and head back over to that contributor profile and show you how to do that. But first I want to go over kind of the thought process behind that. So typically we take a look at a contributor's overall performance on our project using contributor reports, proficiency levels, all of the items that I discussed in this webinar. And at the end of the day, if they are not providing a substantial ROI for our project, it's time for them to be removed. So a few examples of that would be, say we're running a content project. A common occurrence we see is when we have provided feedback for that contributor to make improvements, but oftentimes we send that same feedback over and over again. There has to be a time where we say, we have provided them the means to improve and they have not done so. Typically, we would see if we can promote them, or demote them if they are at a level above beginner. So they're again affected by that soft block. But if not, the next step would be to block them. So there are a couple ways to block a contributor. The first is right at the top of this page, you'll see a little button that says block, and it will pull up a few options. The first would be block from all assignments. This will remove access to every single project you have set up on your account, so that contributor can no longer submit tasks for any of your projects. And then the next will be block from a specific assignment. When we select this, there's going to be a little box that pulls up all of the assignments the contributor has worked on in the past. Simply select the assignment, and then again, you will be prompted to leave a note to the contributor as well as an internal note. Now, when we do change a proficiency level, especially when we're blocking them, the contributor will get a message letting them know that their level has changed. So when we do block the contributor, we highly encourage you to leave a courtesy note explaining the reason behind that block. So even if they're no longer submitting work for that project, they can take that feedback into account and apply it to other projects that they work on in the future. The other way to do this is just like when we promote and demote levels. So again, we would go back to that proficiency level box, select the level, the assignment, and then again, we'll be prompted to leave an internal note or a note to the contributor. And that is a high-level overview of how to master the art of workforce management. We have a few other webinars in the pipeline that will discuss a few of these topics in more depth, such as I mentioned, the reports, as well as how to utilize the rework feature to set up your project for success. If you have any questions, feel free to add them to our chat as we move into the Q&A portion.
Great, thanks, Miranda. Lots of great info here. A couple of questions that I have while we're waiting for people to chat in their questions. Kind of on your last point here is around the sort of the block. So when would you want to block somebody from all projects versus just simply an individual sort of project-based block?
Okay, so thankfully we don't see this very often, but in cases that we do, typically it's a very easy decision to make because say we're running a project that is very easy to complete. Say we have contributors that need to answer multiple choice questions, and they have been flagged several times because they have been providing information that is not valid. So their outputs are not of high quality work. They're obviously favoring quantity over quality in this case, which is the opposite effect of what we want to achieve. So then we would want to assume they will put the same amount of effort on our other projects, and that would be the time we would want to block them from all of their projects.
Got it. Basically, they've essentially burned a bridge with you in which they're just producing just not quality. It doesn't even seem like they're giving a generous effort. So that makes complete sense. One of the other questions I had, which was earlier on in the webinar, which is level-based pay. Like, is there a scenario in which you wouldn't want to enable that for a project?
Yeah, so if we are running a short-term project, it's a little easier to engage our workforce over that period of time. So it really wouldn't really make sense to put in the time to hash out a level-based pay plan because they'll most likely be engaged in that short amount of time. And the level promotions is incentive enough for them to continuously submit work for that project while it is running.
Got it. So I guess that's interesting. So it's almost like proficiencies are really sort of a promotion flow. So as if you were hiring any employee, you want to offer incentives to try to get them to produce better quality, which is typically a higher salary or promotions of some sort. So the correlation's there versus sort of a short-term contract or even a temp worker. You don't necessarily want to build out that entire program. So that makes complete sense. Okay, well, doesn't look like we have any additional questions. So once again, thank you, Miranda, for walking us through this webinar. Thank you all for joining us. And as a final reminder, we will serve up a 2-question survey after we end the webinar. So thanks again for joining us, Mastering the Art of Workforce Management. See ya.